Chapter 16 Awake. I transformed into my dragon form, towering nearly 15 feet tall. My scales shimmered like frosted silver, crystalline under the light, reflecting a cold, pale blue hue. Piercing, glowing eyes radiated icy brilliance. Jagged icicle-like horns crowned my head and frozen spines lined my back. My translucent wings, edged with frost, resembled razor-sharp sheets of shimmering ice. A long, powerful tail trailed behind me, ended in a frozen spike club. I gazed down at the dwarves, who stood frozen in shock. The king recovered first, placing his right fist over his heart. He dropped to one knee and shouted Kasago. His men quickly followed suit, chanting the name in unison. In that moment I felt pride of mother, whose loyal children had served faithfully for centuries, unwavering amid the chaos of the world. Then I spoke, my voice booming and echoing through the underground fortress. My dear dwarves, I am proud of all you have done in my absence. Now with your help, and with the help of others, we shall drive those foul demons back into the abyss and save our world once and for all. The dwarves erupted into cheers, their voices reverberating through the caverns. The noise drew more and more of them, excitement spreading like wildfire. Keenan leaned towards Rieger and whispered, "Why have I been the one giving speeches? He should have been doing them." Rieger chuckled. "Well, he does have 2,000 years more experience." Keenan laughed. "Fair point." I looked down at the king, who beamed with pride, staring up at me in awe. Smiling, I said, "Now, my dear Tormund, if you would permit me to awaken my sister, I would be grateful." Snapping out of his reverie, the king nodded. "Of course, Kasago," he said, turning to lead the way toward the hidden chambers deep within the mine. I returned to my human form, which I had grown quite fond of, and followed him. Keenan walked beside me, grinning. "You do the speeches now." I laughed. "No, I prefer yours." We both chuckled, then Rieger interjected, "Kasago?" I smiled. "That is a name I have not heard in a long time. Mother gave it to me." "Ah," Rieger said. "Well, now I feel left out. You both have multiple names, and here I am with just one." Keenan smirked. "Oh, I can think of a few for you." Rieger laughed. "No thanks. I'm good without any of your suggestions." We arrived at the chamber and stepped into the room where my sister lay frozen. I approached, gazing at her locked in ice. "Ah, sister," I said with a chuckle, "I may regret this, but I suppose I should let you out." Turning to the others, I instructed everyone stand back. I shifted into my dragon form again. It was becoming easier now, though still draining. Facing my sister, I exhaled a deep breath, releasing a powerful blast to reverse the deep freeze she had been in. There we go, I thought. The ice melted quickly, revealing a dragon about half my size. Her scales ranged from deep crimson to molten red, as though forged in fire. They shimmered like embers, glowing faintly in the dim chamber. Her fiery orange eyes burned with intensity, radiating a piercing light. Curved obsidian-like horns swept back from her head, and a jagged ridge of flaming spines ran down her neck and back. Her wings were large and bat-like, their leathery membranes threaded with flickering veins of flame. When they were fully spread, they resembled a raging inferno. Her thick tail ended in a spike club that looked capable of igniting on impact. I smiled to myself. "I'm glad you didn't die." Her eyes fluttered open, she looked around, and locked onto me. "Regret letting me out? Are you crazy?" she snapped, her voice sharp. "I've been stuck in there since your so-called saving me." She groaned and stretched, glaring. "Next time you get mortally wounded and frozen." I shook my head. "Yep, you haven't changed a bit." Shifting back to my human form, I watched her raise an eyebrow. "Oh, okay, we're humans now," she said, then transformed into a young woman. Her human form had jet black hair with a bright red streak, pale freckled skin, and faintly pulsing red veins that shimmered like molten lines beneath the surface. Her burning red eyes lit up when she got excited, glowing like hot embers. She crossed her arms and smirked. "Well," she said, "are you going to introduce me, or should I just keep talking until I find someone willing to help me cause the most trouble?" I sighed. "Everyone, meet my sister, Lily." She gave a mischievous smile and a small wave. "Hello." Keenan shook his head. "You both look so harmless right now." Lily snorted. "Harmless?" Her grin widened. "I'll show you harmless." She inhaled deeply, and I quickly stepped in. "Lily, not here." She paused, then smiled impishly. "You're always spoiling the fun." She punched me playfully in the shoulder. "You're worse than Mother." I glanced at Keenan. "Now you understand how I managed to survive you growing up." Keenan laughed. "I guess so." Before he could say more, Lily zipped over and grabbed Keenan's arm. her eyes narrowing with curiosity. He always tells me who the troublemakers are without realizing it, she said, squinting at him. So, you switched sides, Team Dwarf instead of Demon. Keenan gave me a helpless look. I grinned. You know what, Keenan? She's your problem now. Hey, wait, he called after me. That's not funny. As I walked off, Rieger quickly walked past Keenan to catch up. Hey, wait for me. The king followed behind, shaking his head. She is not what I expected. I laughed. It's okay. You'll either grow to love her or want to kill her. The king stiffened. Kasago, I would never try to kill her. I smiled. Oh, yes, of course. My apologies. He bowed solemnly as if to reassure me of his sincerity. It made me smile. Meanwhile, behind us, Keenan struggled to keep up as Lily bombarded him with questions, still latched onto his arm while he tried to drag her along. Hey, wait for me, he shouted, his voice echoing down the hall. So what was he like when I'm not around? Lily asked, eyes gleaming with curiosity. Keenan glanced at me, mouthing silently, Why me? Rieger and I laughed as we made our way back towards the king's chambers. Lily's endless stream of questions trailing behind us like smoke after fire. When we arrived, the king was smiling and said, the hammer and anvil back together at last. Though clearly thrilled to have both of us back, his expression quickly turned grave. We're stretched thin, he began, and now even more so. But I must ask for your help with two pressing matters, if I may. I nodded for him to continue. We sent a patrol toward the northern peak of the mountains, he said, but they haven't returned. Worse, the scouts we dispatched to investigate also vanished. We're certain something has gone wrong, but we can't afford to lose more men. Still, we can't allow the enemy to establish a foothold, if that's what this is. He paused, then added, I have no right to ask this of you. You should be commanding me, not the other way around, but would you consider investigating? I offered a reassuring smile. Of course we'll help. Relief softened his features. I turned to Rieger and Keenan. You two in? Of course, they said in unison. I glanced around, suddenly realizing Lily was no longer with us. A flicker of concern crossed my mind as I scanned the room. Lily? I called out. The others joined me in the search. A guard approached and bowed. She's at the mural. We quickly followed him. There we found Lily in her dragon form. Her enormous paw rested gently on the image of our Creator. She didn't turn as we approached. You know, she said quietly, he died saving me. Even whispered, her words carried a crushing weight. We stood in respectful silence. That's why, she faltered, voice trembling. That's why I got reckless. She collapsed onto the stone floor. It hurt so much to lose him. She shifted back to her human form and walked slowly over to me. I wrapped my arm around her as she whispered, I'm sorry, brother. I smiled softly. It's okay, I miss him too. No, she said, shaking her head. I'm sorry for being reckless. You had to risk everything to save me, and you almost lost me anyway. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I gently lifted her chin. Hey, that's what family is for. She gave a faint smile, then realizing we were all watching, she quickly wiped the tears away and smirked. Just so we're clear, this time we're going to kill them all. We all smiled, nodding in agreement. Lily took a deep breath and turned to me. So, where to first, brother? I need to stretch my wings and torch some demons. She glanced at Keenan and added with a wink, but we'll keep this one around. Keenan raised his eyebrows and looked at me. Does she know I'm only half demon and also a paladin? I sighed, shaking my head. Wouldn't matter if she did. We laughed, the weight of the moment lifting just enough. Then together we set out for the northern peak, unsure of what awaited us. We carefully climbed the path the guard had shown us, following it as it wound around the mountain. Snow whipped through the air, driven by howling winds that slashed visibility down to 15, maybe 20 feet. We had to shout over the storm just to hear each other. As we navigated the craggy peaks and jagged rock formations, we moved cautiously, always aware of the sheer cliff face on our left. The dwarf guide led the way, with Lily and me close behind. Keenan and Rieger brought up the rear. As we rounded a sharp bend, the guide suddenly dropped to one knee and raised a hand for us to stop. I looked over his shoulder and saw two dead dwarves lying in the middle of the path. Their bodies were battered, heads and shoulders crushed. I shouted back to Keenan, Be ready. Turning to the guide, I asked, Could it have been a rock slide? He shook his head and yelled over the wind, There'd be more signs, sir. What's your name? I asked, catching him off guard. He hesitated. Tholder, sir. You seen combat before, Tholder? No, sir. I gave him a reassuring smile. If things go sideways, get behind me, got it? He nodded firmly, and we pressed on. As we passed the bodies, now partially buried under fresh snow, we spotted a flickering light ahead coming from a cave cut into the hillside. I pulled Thulder close. Go report to the king. We'll take it from here. He nodded and hurried back down the path. We moved toward the cave slowly, weapons drawn. At the entrance, we heard raised voices, deep, guttural, and sharp, speaking in a language none of us recognized. Rieger gestured that he'd go in first to scout. Without a word, he slipped inside, leaving the rest of us waiting outside, tense and ready. 10 long minutes passed before he returned. Well, he said, shaking his head, you're not going to believe this, but I'm pretty sure it's frost giants. What? Keenan exclaimed. I thought those were just myths. Rieger shrugged. So did I. But I've seen the drawings in the library. These match the descriptions perfectly. Lily furrowed her brow. How did they end up here? I don't remember Mother or either of the brothers creating them. I shrugged. Maybe the demons opened portals to other worlds and brought them in. But why? Rieger asked. Good question, I asked. Maybe we should go ask them. Lily cracked her knuckles with a grin. Oh, good. Time to kick some frost giant butt. Slow down, Lil, I said. Let's try to get information first. Rieger leaned in. I heard at least one dwarf deeper in the cave, but one of the giants was blocking the way. I couldn't get to him. Noted, I said. All right, let's see if we can communicate first. We stepped inside, out of the biting wind that whistled through the cave entrance, and cautiously approached the flickering light ahead. Rounding a slight bend, the passage opened into a massive cavern. Near its center, 2 towering frost giants sat around a fire, while a third, smaller but still enormous, stood guard in front of the tunnel behind them. The seated giants were easily 10 to 12 feet tall. The smaller ones stood around 8 or 10. Their hulking frames were wrapped in heavy furs and pelts. Their pale blue frostbitten skin looked cracked and weathered like ancient stone, and their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Each one gripped a massive iron hammer, brutal weapons that could easily have crushed the dwarves we found in the trail. Keenan shook his head and muttered, Well, what could go wrong? Right, I replied dryly, stepping forward. Hello! At the sound of my voice, both seated giants leapt to their feet, grabbing their hammers and scanning the cavern, searching for the source. I raised my hands in a peaceful gesture. We mean you no harm. They glared suspiciously, shouting in that same harsh, guttural language. Louder now, and anything but friendly. I don't understand you, I said, shaking my head. Can you speak common or dwarven? The giants exchanged uncertain glances, but before they could answer, a voice called out from behind the smaller one. We've tried, no luck. Rieger emerged from the shadows and attempted a few words in Elvish and another language I didn't recognize. The giants just looked more confused and more agitated. As the rest of us entered the cavern, the tension spiked. They raised their weapons again, shouting louder. The smaller giant, a female, judging by her voice and build, yelled at the other 2 in her language, clearly arguing. Hey, Keenan, I asked, did they teach you any languages at Paladin Camp? It's not a camp, he muttered, rolling his eyes, and yeah, I know some Infernal. As Keenan stepped forward to speak, the giants reacted violently. They slammed their clubs into the ground and roared in rage. Even the female giant fell silent, her expression turning fearful. Keenan barely got a word out before the 2 males charged. I moved to shove him aside, but before he could reach us, both giants were suddenly flung backwards like rag dolls. Lily stood in her dragon form, smoke curling from her nostrils. She snorted a jet of fire on the ground in front of them. The giants scrambled back, pressing themselves against the cavern wall in terror. It was clear they had never seen a dragon before. Letting out a thunderous roar, Lily froze them in place. They slumped to the ground, cowed and silent. I sighed. Thanks, Lil. She shifted back to her human form and smirked. You're welcome. The shouting was getting annoying anyway. I chuckled. You violent little psycho. She laughed and turned towards the tunnel. Come on out, whoever's back there. 3 dwarves cautiously emerged from the shadows, their expression a mix of awe and confusion. The leader stepped forward, eyes wide. What roared like that? I smiled. We'll explain later. The king sent us to find out what happened here. The dwarf gave a nod. I'm Tholdren, lead scout and siege engineer. I introduced our party, and Tholdren squinted at me. Ah, yes, I remember you arriving a few days ago, though I was out at the time. He continued. We were patrolling the ridge, doing a routine sweep to make sure nothing dangerous had moved in. Predators, scouts, anything. That's when a portal opened behind us and those giants came charging out, swinging their weapons. We lost 3 instantly and had to retreat into the caves. We only found 2 bodies, Keenan noted. Doldrin's expression darkened. Yes, Sally the third was thrown off the cliff. He went on, we tried to communicate, but they just shouted back. Eventually the female stepped in and stopped the other 2 from finishing us off. She seems to have some authority over them, but we didn't know how long that would last. We've been holed up in here since last night. Have you seen the other scouting party? I asked. Doldrin shook his head. No, not a sign of them. Great, Keenan muttered. Another missing patrol. I sighed. Wonderful. So what now? Doldrin shrugged. Unless you know someone who speaks their language, talking's a dead end. Rieger glanced at Keenan and me with a mischievous grin. We could call you know who. I laughed. Yeah, but you remember what he said last time about summoning him unnecessarily. Wait, who? Lily asked. A gnome named Reggie. Keenan answered before we could stop him. Rieger and I groaned. Too late. A portal shimmered open behind us, and a short, irritated figure stepped through. Wild hair, scowl, arms crossed. You better be dying, the gnome snapped, glaring. Keenan mouthed sorry in my direction. Hey, Reggie, I greeted sheepishly. He squinted at me. You don't look like you're dying. In fact, you look annoyingly alive. Reggie scanned the cavern, unimpressed, until he turned around. His eyes widened. Frost giants, he shouted. How in the blazes did you capture frost giants?